Okay, hello everybody. Happy third official year of International Asexuality Day. We're so grateful to be able to start this live stream, and we're going to be doing the African Aces live stream first and foremost here on this page. So I'm Ashabi. My pronouns are she, they. I'm going to be the host for this live stream. I'm based in the US, but I'm Nigerian, so that's why I'm part of this live stream. And I have two other amazing guests. Callie, her pronouns are she, her. She's from South Africa. And Angeli, her pronouns are she, her, and she's also from, say this for me, I'm pretty sure I'm going to say it incorrectly.
Mauritius.
Mauritius. Great. So we're going to get started and just give us a little bit of background on the both of you.
So I can go ahead. So hi, I'm Angeli. My pronouns are she, her. So I work as a consultant on SOGIESC. Actually, I work for an international LGBT rights alliance of Francophone LGBT organizations. It's called EGID and it's based in Montreal. So I work as a programs officer for that organization, and I'm also a consultant on SOGIESC. I've been a lot involved within the wider LGBTQI movement since the past 4 years now. But actually, I identify as asexual, I think, since I was like 15.
Thank you. And Callie?
Hi, Kelly. I don't work specifically in the asexuality or LGBT space, but I am in research. I specialize in digital health and I'm lecturing at university. But then a lot of my research areas in relation to digital health, I also look into a lot of psychology as well, and I'm doing research and supervising students in impacts and relationships between social media use and the different communities that we have on different platforms in relation to the broader LGBTQI plus community, as well as asexuality. So this is my first time in terms of actually being involved in something with asexuality. I've attended just as a, hello, you, hi. I've attended before as a participant, as a viewer, but this is my first time actually taking part. So thank you. Hi.
Well, thank you. We have another guest with us today. Do you mind introducing yourself, pronouns, where you're from, a little bit about you?
Hi, everyone. I am Khala Letsang. I'm in 4. My pronouns are she, her. I'm from Botswana, but I'm currently in South Africa for the moment at school. I feel like I'm over here a lot, but I still write Botswana to represent. You know, you have to. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you for having me on. Yeah.
For sure. Do you want to share anything about yourself, about how you got into asexuality, this community, what work you're doing, all that stuff?
How did I get into asexual? I was kind of just born, and you know, the things, they come, you know, preset in you. But I just remember seeing, in terms of IED, I remember seeing a survey to attend, and it was like, do you also want to say some stuff? I was like, I can say things, but I was very young in my asexuality back then. And I've really enjoyed getting more into the community. Like every few months, there's a new thing that you learn about, like, you know, the carnival or IED and things like that. It's always so great to find pockets of people just being around each other and being happy. It's beautiful. That's my favorite thing, like poetry and indulgence and being happy. That's me. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So just a little more context with me. My name is Ashabi. I host the page and I've created the page Ace and Grace. It's this community on Instagram that I use to uplift and center the asexual community, and also make sure that people who are most marginalized in the communities' voices are being heard. So I focus around Black voices, around Indigenous voices, around majority POC voices, just to make sure that we're having the most inclusive and diverse space within the asexuality community. So with that being said, let's get.
Sorry, car issue. Sorry.
You're fine. That might be an issue with some of our hosts, some of our guests. We might have some.
Yeah, sorry.
That's totally fine. We also have our lovely mod, Kuhu. She's going to be giving us questions from YouTube and questions from each other just so we can get the ball rolling on this live. So, first and foremost, let's all talk about how we started to understand our asexuality as people within this country. Whoever wants to get started, go first.
I can go. I didn't touch on that in my intro. For me, it was just my personal experience is from South Africa or Africa in general. There's pretty much no representation. It is in terms of, at least it's starting now. We're trying to start something. I found the labels in the community quite a few years ago. What's 2020? Probably like was it 8 years ago or something, and I just started Googling because things didn't make sense to me, and that's often common in our community when things don't make sense with who you are, or you feel broken, or you don't feel like you fit into a lot of the norms and understandings of sexuality and sexual attraction, romantic attraction. All of those things are quite, and then of course a lot of us deal with the beliefs of feeling broken or something's wrong with us. So I just started Googling and asking questions like, if I'm not experiencing this, or I'm not attracted to, I'm not feeling sexual attraction just based on someone's appearance, which is very allosexual immediately. If I'm not experiencing that, then what does that make me? So I just started Googling and looking it up and researching, and then found Avon, of course, and then through there, and then it was like, oh, there's conferences, and then COVID eventually provided virtual platforms for that as well. So it's been all through that, through reading up, and eventually, and then I figured out that because personally I identify as demi, so I'm demisexual, demi-romantic, and hetero in orientation. Personally, I was able to find that, but I also understand that in terms of our community in general, not everyone necessarily wants to identify with labels, but then at the same time, a lot of people find a lot of safety, security, community, and answers in labels. You know, the terminology helps give us an understanding of ourselves, or a way to recognize that, okay, it's okay to be this way. There's nothing wrong with us. So that's my personal experience, and I'm quite an advocate. So I'm quite like I wear ACE stuff all the time and LGBT pride stuff all the time, and I try to bring it out here. It's just difficult depending on the environment. There's not a lot of visibility and not a lot of representation. That's me. Spoken up.
Anyone next?
I can go next. I think for me, what happened was really, it was around the time when you're 14, 15, and you're like seeing all your friends having boyfriends, girlfriends, and you're like, why am I not attracted to someone? What's happening here? Why are everyone just getting into couples? And, that was that period when I was just questioning myself. And then, luckily, around that time, I came across an article in a scientific magazine, which talk about asexual people, and I was like, oh, that's exactly what I am actually. So, and I think at that point, there was kind of a certainty about this is what I identify as. But then as you grew up, when you go to university, you start questioning the label that you are identifying with, and you start to wonder, but is it really asexuality that I'm identifying with, or isn't it more like pansexuality or something, or I haven't been able to discover? Because you always have that pressure around you, because you have a society which is kind of centered around sex, around being in sexual relationships. So at some point you start to question whether you are choosing the right label for yourself. And then I think at some point you start finding the confidence of choosing and earning that label that applies to you, and to say that this is who I am and I'm proud of it. And I think for me that has been the journey for it. And I think when I was in university, even in Mauritius, I think the first time I met another asexual person was, I think, last year. between I was 15 till I was 32, I had never met another asexual person in Mauritius. So that was quite funny.
It happens.
Yeah. But for example, when I was in university, I was using Tumblr a lot, and that allowed me to kind of connect with a lot of asexual people around the world. And when I started working, even within the LGBTQI movement here and internationally, I had never really come across asexual people within the movement, within the mainstream movement, and that was kind of an isolating experience for yourself, because you're like, okay, I am here as myself in this space, but I don't see other people like me. So is my identity valid in this or not? For me, this has been kind of this journey with ups and downs.
Yeah. Finding community it is crucial. Like for every single thing that you are and everything that you enjoy, like finding community helps so much. And it really is, like, that's one of the greatest injustices of like not having proper representation, is that we're starved of that, a lot of us, for like 10 years, 20 years. It really sucks. I was quite a romantic child, and I'm still quite a romantic person, and so I was able to stave off the questioning until I was like in my 20s, because I also didn't mind dating when I was young. The attention isn't bad. I wouldn't refuse it, but then there's always, like, it changes as you grow up, but there's always a certain amount of time when a couple should start progressing to whatever stage is thought to be appropriate for that age. And that was always the problem for me, and I didn't really see that pattern until I was in my 20s, that okay, after dating somebody for an amount of time, you are supposed to move on from kissing to this, from this to that. And at some point it didn't even just give me anxiety, it was just like dread, and something I had to get over with for the sake of the romance, for the sake of this big lovely thing that's supposed to mean everything to you, which once I become comfortable with my asexuality, is then something I can also start to question and think about how I enjoy and what the implications are for other parts of my life. But yeah, so that was why I didn't really think about asexuality when I was a child. Or when I was a teenager. And then in my 20s, I had known about the term, but it took reading an article and just like sitting down properly with that article to start to realize that this term is something I can apply to myself. Because as you know, like, this is something you can that people think you can wait out. You can sort of wait out your asexuality, and one day you will feel this for this person, or you'll feel normal. And I think for me, it wasn't even just realizing that I was asexual so much as, or it wasn't realizing that I didn't feel sexual attraction so much as to, characterize it as that, to say that this is something I might never feel, and therefore this is the label that applies to me, and this is the community of people who also don't feel sexual attraction. And I'm no longer waiting to sexually develop or something. That's me.
All of that is definitely relatable for me. Yeah, when I also went through the phase of like everyone around me is dating, everyone around me is having sex, and I'm just kind of like, oh, okay, this makes sense. But whenever I would like engage in it, it would be very weird and awkward for me. And thankfully, Tumblr was a very big part of my life when I was young, and it gave me a really good way to understand what I was looking for in regards to terminology and the identity and the feelings I was feeling. And asexuality really aligned with me, and it still does to this day. But even in that space, it was difficult because I wasn't seeing asexual people who would pick me at all, or asexual people who were really into dating or like liked romance or even like sex. So it was very much like, oh, you're asexual, you're a prude, you don't engage in these things, you are very much distant from engaging in things that make other like stereotypical hetero-romantic people like happy. And it really did feel isolating to feel like, oh, am I like a fake in this community? Am I not actually acceptable? Am I something else? And like it was said earlier, the lack of representation is really an injustice in this space. And it really does limit the amount of possibilities people in this community have to see themselves in a way that may have not been represented earlier because of lack of resources, lack of technology, lack of online spaces like this. So it's been a journey, and that's also why I made Ace and Grace. But even with that creation, there's still so many people that have not had their experiences been highlighted or heard. And that's also why African Aces live stream is happening right now, because even though there's representation in the community, there still needs to be conversations within the community so that other asexual people as a community actually feel represented in a way that has their stories be heard. So on that topic, we're all in different countries. I might be in the US, but I'm still Nigerian, and even trying to find aces that align with me in that way is difficult. So in your own respective countries, how do you find representation? How do you find community? What does that look like for you?
I can go first. I think for me, if you look at Mauritius, I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It's like this very, very tiny island in the middle of the Indian Ocean. So, like, as an island, you're already isolated from the rest of the world. And now imagine being a minority within this island, and a minority within another minority. So you kinds of gets difficult to find community, and especially, for example, for me during my teenage years, and if I compare during that time and now, there was quite a lot of taboo around sexuality. So people didn't really speak openly about their sexual orientation, for example, and let alone about asexuality. So it was difficult, for example, at that time to find other people who would identify openly as asexual than it is today. And so I think for me, that was really hard at that time to find community, in person within the place you're living in. But it was easier to find online community because you could connect with people around the world, so you didn't really feel as much alone. But to really find that community, even today, it's difficult, for example, to kind of form an asexual community in Mauritius because you don't really know how many people identify as asexual in Mauritius and would really want to be part of that community. Because for a long time, actually, the mainstream LGBTQI community was really about LGBTQI people. From time to time, you would add the A, but then you wouldn't really see, for example, asexual issues being represented in the advocacy work that's being done, or in the communications that's being done, or the sensitization. So at the end of the day, even if the A was there, there was no representation of real asexual people telling their stories or sharing with the wider LGBTQI community. So I think that was something that makes it harder for asexual people really to find that, that community that's made for asexual people, by asexual people, and with asexual people.
Mm. I like that you added that caveat. It is really difficult to find people who can actually come out and say, hey, this is what I am, and actually feel support in that, because there's so few of us. And
Yeah.
even that, there should be an opportunity to have those few come together and share their experiences. What about you, Kelly?
I think the representation links for us in probably our continent, it links quite closely with awareness and education, because representation matters, but I think representation's happening like at a higher level, whereas I think a lot of people aren't even aware that there are labels like that, that there's communities like that, that there's peoples like us. So I think what's happening, probably, just assumptions, is there's probably a lot of us all around that we're even passing in our daily lives who who are experiencing the feelings and thoughts of where we've been with unbroken Why don't I experience this? Why don't I find that attractive? Why am I not drawn to this? What's wrong with me? I think still a lot of people that aren't aware that the A even is there, or that the A isn't ally, in my opinion. It's asexual, it's aromantic, it's agender, it's not ally. That we exist. I think that education, before we even get to the representation, they might not even know that we're there. So then they're not even necessarily looking for the representation, or even recognizing it when it is there, if they're not informed enough. So I think the two, I don't know if I'm making sense, but I think the two things interlink quite a lot. So yeah, because it seems from a lot of our stories, we found the information before we searched for the representation. And I don't know if,
Yeah.
No,
I think there's a lot of awareness in general, and that goes education systems in, I can only speak on behalf of South Africa, for instance, but probably Africa in general, because South Africa is pretty progressive in terms of LGBT, queer, LGBTQI plus and queer. It's a lot of African countries face a lot of hardship. So South Africa itself is quite progressive, but then even South Africa as a potentially progressive country within the African continent is even not like, it's more just towards LGBT rather, and I starting to get some more recognition. The A lot of people, that either we don't exist or A is ally. It's education as well, in my opinion.
No, that makes perfect sense. Everything you said makes perfect sense. I think for a lot of people who are trying to find their place in this community, they definitely are looking at articles first and looking at other things first before finally sitting and saying, yeah, I think this makes sense to me. But even with that being the thought process for most of us, there's still a little bit of shame because of the societies we live in. We are always seeing sex being prioritized in relationships and sex being the thing that brings people together and makes people feel loved and supported. So when you take that aspect out, when you start to say, oh, I'm not sexually attracted to anybody, people look at you and think, oh, well, then how do you form meaningful relationships? How do you love people? How do you let people know that they're loved? And even with us all saying that we're asexual, there's this level of, oh, well, how do I explain to people that there's different types of intimacy that allow me to actually support and show love to people that I care about? And people are really hesitant to actually explore that deeper, which is why it's so hard for a lot of us to actually center this identity within our communities and actually have people be proud to say, oh, yeah, I'm asexual. This is something that needs to be celebrated because there's different ways to show love and just live as a human being, you know? I think I have yet to hear from our other guests. Can you please share what your thoughts are around finding representation in your community? Yes. Also, you're muted.
You'd think I would have learned for 3 years. I would learn this one thing. Oh my god. So yeah, for me, in Botswana and in South Africa, it's mainly Facebook groups. That's where you find like the largest congregations, like 200 people. In Botswana, we have two. So that's for South Africa, it's that times 100, which should tell you about the difference between us. Yeah, so that's basically how I do find people. There was also a Reddit post on our Botswana subreddit, which we sort of just got together a group chat, all the asexuals in Botswana. So it's really worth literally just asking whichever social media you are most comfortable on, whichever one you find yourself on the most frequently. So if you know it well, you know the etiquette, you know how to judge whether you can trust people. Like it's worth just asking on there, where are the asexuals in my city, where are the asexuals in my country, and sort of, take them off platform, which, is how things get dangerous. But yeah, take them off platform to another safe platform and just try and see if you can congregate by yourselves there. It has been hard and, sometimes disappointing, to not find asexual Botswana, but like we just keep going, we keep reaching out, we keep trying events that or get-togethers that are sometimes poorly attended, or sometimes don't run very smoothly, but it's very worth it to find asexuals that grew up near where you grew up and grew up with the same kind of, you know, questions about why things are the way they are, that are particular to the way people live in your area. I think it's very worth it to, if you are comfortable saying that you're asexual and that you want to meet people, it's very worth it to say it in those plain words. Hopefully, people will come out of the woodworks. That's how I do it. That's how. Oh shit! I read the question wrong. I was answering a different question.
No, you answered
But I
it.
guess yeah. No, but that was not about representation. That was about community. I was answering the question of how you find community. But
I
that's
think
what's
it
on
all
my mind.
integrates.
Yeah.
I think it's all connected to, because I know I was saying like education before representation, but I was just thinking representation is also education. So as we grow and develop our communities on the African continent and within the queer community overall in general, as we grow representation, then we'll find more representation within local communities, you know, whether it's if people are religious, they find them in church, or if people are at university, they might find other students who have formed communities.
Exactly.
And through the representation, they'll be like, oh, wait, and then they learn afterwards. So I do think it's all, and the communities that you're in, if they're popping up in different places, then
Yeah.
Actually,
Oh, go for it, Allergy.
no, actually, one funny anecdote that I would like to share is how I kind of joined the International Asexuality Day community. Was actually when someone reached out to me on a dating app to tell me about this community.
Oh wow.
that's wonderful. It shows you the ways that we can, the different.
Yeah.
So we're gonna move on to our next question. So our next question is, what is asexuality's place within the queer community?
That we're there.
We're not even really
We're there, but we're not always recognized.
Sometimes they don't. Okay, in Africa specifically, a lot of like the community and like the congregation building is around healthcare and legislation, right? So it's usually healthcare first and then legislation. And so if you're not having sex and people don't know exactly what life or death problem they are going to, you know, that they're going to talk about in order to get funding for, like then there's, you know, like you're not really that relevant. And then there's also legislation, which even as the ace community globally, we haven't like gotten around to getting everybody on board in terms of what legislation we would like in order to support the way in which we generally live our lives, or the way in which a pattern of ace people tend to live their lives. You know what I mean? And so in those ways, sometimes we are left out of queer things because of like oppression Olympic stuff. But I have found, anecdotally, I found non-binary people to just get asexuality just like instantly. Like they don't need a lot of explanation. But yes, as with any community, I think it's very varied the way we are included, accepted, embraced. In terms of formal community, I do think it's quite sad that because of a lack of organization, there's a lack of organization in terms of asexual needs and, you know, rights and things like that we do get left out of queer things. At least what I've seen in South Africa and Botswana. Although, of course, we do see that like countries like Uganda are now also specifically legislating against asexual people, which is new and scary. And like, what? Yeah, it's like back to, you know, Christian times or whatever. Yeah. So that's one thing.
I think that a lot of what Kala says kind of resonates because there's a lot to say about what is asexuality's place within the queer community. Because in Africa, in most of the countries, the LGBTQI movement really started around programs centered on HIV, on the fight against HIV and AIDS. So it was a lot. There's a lot of focus on, for example, men having sex with men and transgender population, rather than the whole LGBTQI community in the whole spectrum of the community. So it's really started from there. So I think that the focus on sexual relationships was there right from the beginning in many of the movements around Africa. And to really shift from that to accepting the whole other identities on the whole spectrum of sexuality and gender has been kind of a long journey. And even today, for example, just to make people understand that the A is for asexual people rather than allies, it's difficult because a lot of people will be like, oh no, I think it's allies because it was there to have people feel more safe within the community if they were not open about their identities, rather than just accepting that the A is for asexuality. So I think that's really been one of the obstacles towards the recognition of asexuality within the queer community in Africa. And I think one of the reasons as well that the asexual community has been kind of erased within the wider queer community is also because, as Gala said, there was this whole emphasis on legislation, and we have a lot of countries within Africa who criminalize same-sex relationships, for example. So I think most of the organizations here, of the movements here, have been focused on really, getting those laws abolished. So within these two priorities on healthcare and legislation, I think there has been this erasure of the asexual community. But I would also say that even within the LGBTQI community, even within the queer community, there is still a lot of ignorance about the asexual community. What are the problems affecting asexual people today? I know that, for example, there would be, in terms of fundings, when you would have call for proposals saying that we want to fund LGBTQIA plus organizations, that organizations would be sending in proposals saying that we cater for the LGBTQIA plus community. But when the funding comes and when the programs are implemented, they would be focused on, for example, lesbian women, gay men, or transgender people. And sometimes you won't have anything about the asexual community when the funding really includes the A, and the proposal had included the A. So I think these are some of the issues that we have about the place of asexual people within the queer community in Africa today. And so I think some time ago, I read an article about someone who was talking about, the laws in my country about, because we have a very comprehensive Equal Opportunities Act, which includes sexual orientation. And they were saying that, it is a very progressive piece of legislation because it protects LGBTQIA+ people. But when you look at the law, for example, asexuality is not recognized as a sexual orientation, which means that, for example, asexual people are barred from the protection of that law. So I think this ignorance that the wider community has about the issues that asexual people face kind of contributes to the further erasure of asexual people within the community.
If I may, just on what Angela was saying about funding including us, or funding including work that supports us, and how that isn't utilized for us. It seems like it's like the same problem you have with government, whereby if asexual people don't speak up and hold these organizations accountable for claiming to support us and then not actually using any of their effort, time, money to support us, then we're not going to get anything. So it also becomes a community and organization problem, where we also, the same way you need to keep your foot on the government's neck in order for them to actually work. Why are you laughing?
Because it's true. It's so true. It's just true.
Yeah. And so you would also need to do the same for these queer organizations that or seem to be aware of us, you know, but are not actually that interested in doing anything to support us. Yeah.
Yes,
Sorry, I did not want to take time away from you, Kelly, answering this question.
No, I spoke in the beginning.
Yeah. If I might add to what Hala said, about, keeping organizations accountable, I think it's also about, whenever we find ourselves in spaces, in queer spaces, to really speak out whenever we see, for example, there is an erasure of asexual identities,
Exactly.
or that we're not included. For example, the organization I work for, just at the beginning, when I entered the organization, when I said that, I identify as an asexual person, and then when, for example, there are forms which are being circulated within the staff of the organization. So to say that, for example, whenever you're said, okay, what's your sexual orientation, to say that you need to add asexuality out there, to really, these are kind of small things that sometimes we just say, okay, we can just let it go. But usually it's these small things that kind of build up, for you to ask for bigger things.
Because it's also just the community overall. Certain parts of the community are getting more recognition. They're more out there in terms of there if you're filling in a form, and then we're erased. So then where's our place? How come some parts get more? We understand why some parts get more because of the history and how it's been growing and everything over the years. But I think a lot of what we face now is what was faced by other parts of our broader community, other labels within our community a few decades ago. And then it feels like asexuality and aromantics and and agender as well also falls under the A. We're like catching up, but we're a few decades behind. So we face different forms of discrimination, marginalization, prejudices, stereotypes, navigating within society, being recognized, being like, hello, we exist. We're not broken. Don't pathologize us, which is another one. And finding our place within the community is difficult, given I also feel that we're playing catch up within our own community, if that makes sense. So it's not just trying to find our place within the community, find our place within society. We're working with quite a few, navigating our space and trying to find our space.
I think it's always interesting, just for me personally, as I've started to look more into Nigeria's history within the queer community and queer culture, I always get linked back to colonialism and the harms that just having that completely destroy the history of Africa as a whole and bastardize a lot of what queerness looks like in a lot of our countries. For me personally in Nigeria, I recently started to realize that the usage of pronouns is not really a thing in our language. And when I was younger, it would really get me upset because my parents would always switch between he and her, and I'm just like, oh girl, why are you calling me a he? And recently, I'm just like, oh, it's because it's not a big thing in Nigeria. It's not a thing. And like looking into it deeper, is looking at the Orishas and the Ifas and the like gods and goddesses that Nigerians worship. There's a lot of gender ambiguity in that in itself, and it breaks my heart knowing that there are such harsh laws around queerness and specifically like gayness and like lesbianness and like transness in Nigeria, because culturally, like Africa as a whole is a very open and queer like community, and there are very much less restrictions around how you identify, how you live life, and because of colonialism, because of the impacts of Christianity, a lot of that has been forgotten. And I think looking at it now and looking at how strict laws have become, it's going to be a really more impactful and really more important for a lot of us to just try and find representation safely in our spaces, because it's going to be even more hard knowing that despite the fact that we all are aware of what our history is and our respective cultures, there isn't going to be a lot of help trying to support that unless there's more representation of safety for us to actually be ourselves. And yeah, just something that I think about often. I think a lot of you touched upon that when it comes to social for queer communities really has to stay when you're trying to find things like that. Even as asexual people, we really do have to be conscious of that. Okay, so our next question is: have you seen any changes in attitudes towards ACEs in your country in recent years?
Personally, no. It's kind of like I just don't find it or see it here. My personal experience, I'm talking.
At all?
Not that I've personally experienced, no.
I think this is not specific to asexuality, but I do see like people in Botswana being heartwarmingly a little scared of misgendering the alphabets or saying something insensitive to the alphabets, and they call us the alphabets. It's not very specific. I mean, I don't not love it. That's the thing. I think it's fine. Yeah, so not asexuality specifically, but there is an awareness that's quite linked to the idea that the straight person is doing something wrong, like being a bad person, you know what I mean? So there isn't like an effort to embrace or learn, or a widespread one. Let me say, I don't know what's going on in the little like pockets of community, but I think in general there is an awareness and a sort of like a moral obligation that's creeping up about how to treat the queer community.
In Mauritius, I think there has been a shift. Because last year, I think it was for International Asexuality Day, actually, that I kind of sent out a Twitter thread around, what's asexuality and what has been my experience in Mauritius as an asexual person. And I was kind of afraid that, I would be getting like weird comments from people in Mauritius. And actually, they were very supportive and they wanted to learn more and they were asking questions. So I think that there has been this kind of shift that's going there, but we are not there where we want it to be.
Yeah, I think I answered wrong in saying like no, there's no attitude changes, but I think I was thinking more specifically towards. For me, it's more globally that I'm seeing it happening, not just the country. Well, my country, South Africa. Globally, there's a shift and a slow increase in awareness, and I think we're also talking about generational things and how things are changing and our access to internet and with the information that comes with the generational changes. Because if we also look in terms of generations, it was more conservative back then, or you didn't talk about certain things, or certain things were closeted. Whereas now there's more discussion, there's more openness, and as there's more openness and discussion, attitudes are changing and being more open to discuss. I don't know if I'm making sense, but it's just, so I think it's a more, I see it in terms of not just a country specific thing, but as we've also become more globalized internationally, that it's the generational thing is also coming through with people just openly more discussing these things that weren't discussed as much back then. Like you didn't discuss sex now, like you know how it was discussed back then is not how you discuss it now. Same with sexuality or the openness with it, or also with the openness with it comes feeling safe to express yourself openly and to feel proud, and that also helps shift attitudes around. So even personally, how I will very proudly state what I am. I don't go around necessarily screaming it from the rooftops because I don't think I have to in terms of pushing my identity on others. But if other people ask, or I wear representation things or symbols and stuff, and then you see the shifts changing in attitude and openness. So then people ask, and so there's more openness in that sense. I do see it. But then I think the attitudes are both positive and negative depending on the cultural. I think what's difficult in terms of the African continent is how many cultures. There are quite a beautiful cultural mix on this continent. But then you're also dealing with different views, different beliefs, and how sometimes the attitudes and beliefs, the navigating of that with the openness and the changes of the generations and everything over time. Because even within specific cultures, there's different generational conflicts in terms of openness versus not as open. No.
Could we also open it up to the chat? I see that there's somebody from Kenya in the chat. So if you could please tell us what's going on in your country and whether things are slowly, becoming more inclusive, then yeah, I'd love to hear. I'd love to read what everybody's I want to say going through, but yeah, what your experience is in your country.
In the meantime, as they formulate their questions, I think there's 2 people from Kenya in the chat. Just for me, like living in the US and being able to be very out loud about my asexuality, it's been a challenge, mostly because despite the fact that there's been progress, it's been very interesting to see how that progress has been consistently leaving out asexuality. Like, obviously, at first we had the passing of same-sex marriage, and despite the fact that everyone was excited, it was very clear that the people who were most excited were gay white men who were going to be the face of this movement, essentially. And then moving on, we ended up having transness being centered, and while we have so much support around this, we keep forgetting the fact that you can be gay and asexual, you can be trans and asexual, you can be lesbian and asexual, you can be agender and asexual. Asexuality should be the second and last thought about all of these things. It should be in combination with all of these different things. And people don't really want to think that, because a lot of the times in the queer community are hypersexualized and oversexualized. So we end up being left out of the conversation and being seen as other, being seen as not valid or not valued, despite the fact that there's so many different ways to be a human in general. And omitting this from the human experience is, again, an injustice to a lot of the people who are in this community and have lived it authentically without the label. So just being in the US, it's been a difficult but interesting journey to see. And with me also being Nigerian, it's been very, very, how do I say this, rewarding in a sense. It's even harder to find queer Nigerians in the US, which is interesting because you think it'd be a lot more open here. But Nigerian community is very small. So if people know that you're queer, it's kind of like, oh, I'm going to tell your mom. And I'm going to tell your uncle, I'm going to tell your auntie, and then you're going to get in trouble. And it's so much. But even with that, I have a quick story to share just because it always makes me cry, it makes me really excited to share. But I have a friend who is Nigerian, she's younger than me, she's queer, and I'm very active on socials in regards to sharing my sexual journey and like sharing who I am as an asexual person. And she invited me to a party one time, and I had a conversation, and she was telling me about how she's from Nigeria and she came to the US, and she was telling me how like her siblings and everything know about her being queer, but her parents didn't know. And I was under the assumption that her parents were aware. And she was like, no, my parents didn't know. But like hearing your experience and hearing your journey, I came out to my parents. And I'm just like, oh, wow, really? And she was like, yeah, I came out to my parents. And it was difficult. It was rough. My mom through all stages of grief and anger. My dad doesn't want to talk to me, but I came out to them. My siblings supported me. And it was just something I needed to do. And when I tell you, I could not stop crying at all, because it's just like, when you think about representation, when you think about just being visible as an asexual person, you don't really think about the impacts that it has on other people. You just think about being authentic to yourself. So when other people see that and feel empowered to actually step into their truth because of you, it's something that is so powerful, and it's something that we all deserve within the community as asexuals, especially being so little representation in our communities. We all deserve to have that kind of empowerment to be ourselves and share that with other people in our communities as well. But yeah, I just think that there should be more support around that and more community around that too. I haven't seen our Kenyan people share any kind of thoughts yet, but if you want to share, please do. We'd love to hear some more thoughts around what's happening in the African countries and what other experiences may not have been shared in this live stream at all. But I'm going to move on to the next question. And the next question is, are people feeling more or less connected since the last International Asexuality Day?
Well, this was also, I was going to say, this was also a question for the people who attended the last Asexuality Day. I did not intend it for us. But I will say there has been, I think since the last day, I've made some more efforts to reach out. And I think that was the important thing, to see that people are here, because people like send me a message and say, hi, I'm also from South Africa. And so, yes, I have felt more connected in the sense that I have tried to set up, events, groups, discussions, and things like that, so that people keep in contact after the day.
Yeah, I share the same experience. I've really kind of, got to meet new people, to connect with more asexual people around the world. I've also participated in more asexuality related events since the last International Asexuality Day. And I think for me, what has been one of the highlights last year was I was kind of invited by a private company to share my experience as an asexual person to them. So I think that was really, kind of something that spurred from International Asexuality Day, but which also kind of gave me the confidence to really, kind of take up space and share my experience as an asexual person, and with the wider population, with a wider audience, rather than to just be within the asexual community.
Ellie?
For me personally, I have probably, my experience probably differs in that it hasn't been more or less. Mine has probably just been, it's been at a constant. So I feel as connected, not more or less. So my experience just differs. I mean, I would have loved for it to be more, but it's just been more the same kind of. Yeah. So I don't know much to say in that regard. Sorry.
That's fine. I think that it's been interesting for me, mostly because just as the person who's like doing a lot of these things, it's hard for me to try to find like constant community outside of the online spaces. Mostly because, like I mentioned, most people within the queer community in my spaces are just not really trying to say that they're asexual because it ostracizes them. And me being the person who doesn't care, I like hop between groups all the time. I'm gonna say it and honestly just live my life and just be that person. And even in that, I've had people who are in my circle just come to me and be like, oh, I think that I'm asexual. And they'll only come to me, but they won't go to their respective groups and share it. So it's really interesting being the person that they feel comfortable to share these things with, but not feel comfortable enough to talk to their closer friends about it. So it's been a interesting thing to see, especially as we like start to have more types of representation around asexuality in media. But even with that type of like rap, it's mostly white, it's mostly like male. It's not really like people who look like me or anyone else in this chat who is represented, and especially in a way that actually validates different types of ways to be asexual. So while I am always going to feel connected to the ACE community, I wish there was more ways for people who look like us to feel connected to each other. So next question is, how can we plan, Kathy,
Sorry.
What are you doing again?
how can we plan ways for proactively building the community within Africa?
Anjali, was this your question? It's so hard.
These are thoughtful questions, though. So,
Well,
South Africa. Power crisis, you know. Sorry about that.
Okay, guys, I also might get load shedding in a couple of minutes. When I'm gone,
It's just gonna go.
Yeah, if I disappear, know that I'm
You know.
probably okay.
You're here in spirit.
Yeah.
We'll support you.
Yes, but I think my proactive way of building community is just sort of to encourage people that come to IAD to keep in contact if they can, and see if there are people where they're from or people who have the same interests, you know, with, yeah, if you have common interests with somebody that you meet in the comments, you know, it might be worth reaching out to them afterward. I know that people did that for me, or people did that with me after the last IAD, and it was heartwarming. It turns out they were right here in Cape Town. It's crazy. You don't know who's around, and you don't know who's ACE. So I think in terms of those small ways of building relationships and building networks of care and things like that, and increasing visibility, then yeah, I think that might be something we should consciously look toward in the future, just how to encourage people to reach out after these like big congregations. Yeah.
I share the same sentiments, definitely. You're Cape Town at the moment, from you're staying there for studies. So. Yeah, because also Cape Town, if we look just looking at South Africa as a country, Cape Town and Joburg are more progressive and more visibility, more talking about these things, more opportunities for proactively building. Whereas some other parts of I'm just talking about South Africa now, other parts it's not as easily, yeah, it depends, I guess. But I do definitely agree. I think beyond my country, for Africa in general, for us to proactively build more. It's just finding people. That's what I find the hard part is you might not know they're there. Like you were saying, they're there, but you didn't know they were there. And finding it and then finding other people to proactively build together and plan ways forward to increase visibility, to increase awareness, education, representation. Yeah.
I have actually been kind of looking at the different regional organizations working on queer rights in Africa today, and I've seen that a few of them have actually kind of put out, publications around International Asexuality Day, which I think is a great beginning. And I think it's also our responsibility, if we really want to kind of, build a community within Africa, is to also to reach out to these regional movements who are in touch with different countries to say, how do we include asexuality within the work that you're already doing at a regional level?
If you have the chance, can you also drop those articles that you found in the chat? Just so that
sure.
everyone has access to it. Yeah, how can we plan for ways to proactively building in the community within Africa? I feel like a lot of you touched on that, especially since you're there, you know the most of what work can be done. Only for me, I can just say that I hope that there are more brave activists and organizers within these countries able to communicate with leaders who can kind of put their egos and prides aside and listen to the communities that they serve. Because at the end of the day, the countries wouldn't be who they are without the people who are part of them. So being able to actually listen to those people would be a really great first step towards building the communities that we deserve to see in our world. Yay, we got a commentary. So from Kenya, they say, in Kenya, it's much better now, though still requires a lot to reach out to everyone. After me going through all the challenges, trying to discover who I am, and also acceptance and inclusivity. Thank you so much for sharing.
Guys, the load shedding has kicked in. That means the Wi-Fi is about to. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me on, and Angie and Kelly. And yeah, it's been really nice to meet you all. Your name has disappeared, but somehow I feel very bad. I really hope that we get another shot at building community again. And I'm very happy that we did this.
Thank you so much for being a part, and have a good rest of your day.
Bye. Thank you.
Oh, is there something you definitely wanted to talk about that I might miss? So now that we've gone through those questions, let's find another one. I know that we are seeing a lot of progress in the UK with laws that are centering the safety on asexual people. In the countries of Africa, within asexuality in the law, what legal reforms do you think are going to be needed to protect this community?
So I think that there are two kind of laws that we have in Africa. We have the laws that are criminalizing people because of their sexuality, and for example, with the bill in Ghana, which kind of really criminalizes also asexual people, which is kind of something new that I hadn't seen before, and I think with what's happening in Africa today, this is going to be influencing a lot of countries because we have seen Uganda, we have seen a rising homophobia in Burundi, in Kenya as well. So I think these kind of laws, it's not going to be limited just to Ghana. I think many other countries are going eventually to have similar bills, which are going to be passed. And I think that's where the kind of erasure that LGBTQI people have always been having within the queer movement is going to backfire, because at the same time that people are saying that we need not criminalize homosexuality, once again, they're forgetting that these laws are also criminalizing today asexual people, and which is something that we hadn't seen before, neither in Europe nor in America. Because for most of the time, when you have a law coming in Africa, you would see something similar in other places around the world. And for the first time, I've seen a law which specifically criminalizes asexual people. And I think that's kind of a dangerous precedent that's going to be set, and that we need to be aware of, and that the wider LGBTQI movement in Africa needs to be aware of. And on the other hand, you have laws protecting LGBTQI people. And in most of these laws, what happens is that the definition of sexual orientation remains very limited. For example, if we take the case of Mauritius, they define clearly sexual orientation as including homosexuality, heterosexuality, and bisexuality. So, which means that an asexual person cannot really prevail themselves of this law to, for example, file a complaint before the Equal Opportunities Commission. And even if it's about, filing a case for sexual harassment, because it's not included as sexual orientation within the scope of the law. So I think these are the two things that lawmakers in Africa need to look at if they really want to protect LGBTQI people, LGBTQIA plus people through the law. It's really, first of all, to avoid the laws criminalizing asexual people, and secondly, to kind of make the laws, comprehensive in terms of protecting asexual people. And I think one of the things that I've also seen in terms of law is about, there are some countries where, for example, for marriage to be valid, there needs to be consummation. So these are also one of the kind of archaic laws that are still applied in some parts of the world. Um, and what else do we have in terms of legal reform? And yes, of course, you have the something that's still there in many countries, especially those with a civil code, is the laws which says, which doesn't criminalize rape within a marriage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Callie, do you have anything to add?
No, he's touched on every, yeah. I just agree with all of.
Yeah. I think that it's going to be really, like you mentioned, it's going to be really interesting to see how other African countries follow suit with that very intense law that just got passed. It was very interesting to see that they criminalized all aspects of queer identities, not just if you're gay. It's literally LGBTQIA plus, which is historic in the worst way possible. So I really do hope and pray that there is some sort of outrage around this, because A, it shouldn't be, there's no reason for that law to exist in the first place, and B, just speaking as just speaking as a whole for Africa, there's so much possibility for progress here, and there's so much possibility to be that change that everyone looks to. And to have such a backwards law be put in place for just fear-based mongering is just frustrating to have to witness from afar. And I hope that people who are in that country are actually finding ways to keep each other safe. Yeah. Also, another comment from our Kenya person. They said that that's our wave, Women, Asexuality, Visibility, Education. And Kenya was born. They're one of the founders, and today is our first ACE Visibility Day. We're so happy to have founded this organization. Well, congrats to you for having your first Visibility Day and being a part of this live stream. It's a really great thing to have organized that in Kenya, and I'm really excited to see the growth that comes from that. There's one question in the chat, and they asked, hey y'all, African American ACE here. I do wonder why ACEs seem to get a pass in the Black community. Like, people literally don't care when I tell them, but are still homophobic as all hell. I'll answer this for a little bit. So just speaking as a person who's in the US and identifies as ACE, I'm also going to give a presentation on this later. So that's going to happen at 3 if you want to join. But just a little bit on that. A lot of the times when I share that I'm asexual and that I'm Black, it's very much, I think catch-22 is the good phrase that I'm using. It seems like it's a contradiction for most people, mostly because as a Black person, as a Black femme, Black woman in general, our identities are not really centered in a lot of experiences when it comes to being queer. Oftentimes when we share that we're taking our power back or taking a hold of our identities, we're dismissed. And that's because of obviously the history behind slavery and the history behind the US and the history behind how women have been treated for centuries and how we basically don't have the autonomy of ourselves. And it also falls into the two things which it comes from, the Jezebel stereotype and the mammy stereotype, and basically saying that we don't have the opportunity to identify as X, Y, and Z because we already put you in this box, and that's the box you're going to stay in because that's what makes us comfortable. And whenever Black people share that they're asexual, it kind of comes off as, oh, well, I don't see you as a person who doesn't see other people as sexually attractive because I find you sexually attractive. And I'm always going to find you sexually attractive. So you can't do anything about it. And when it comes to the homophobic aspect, that's just a part of being queer, honestly. Like, when it comes to identifying as any part of the queer community, there's going to be phobias and isms attached to it because people refuse to acknowledge that A, asexuality is a valid identity, and B, that it's separate from all the other identities that are part of this community. So unfortunately, there's going to be a lot of backlash being Black and asexual because we have gone through a long history of not being able to identify as something that makes us feel empowered. And there's a lot of people in the US like me, and there's also people in the UK like Yasmin who are actively working against this type of negative representation by being as visible as possible and making sure that different aspects of asexuality are presented within the Black identity so that more people actually understand that you can be asexual and be ace and it's totally normal. So that's something that ends up being the most difficult part is being Black and ace. And it's going to be a hard thing until we actually have accurate and intentional representation across media and literary articles and books and all those things. So there's the tea on that. But next question is, are there any quirks of your local ACE community?
That's hard to answer for me because I'm yet to find the local ACE community.
That's my answer. I don't really. For me, personally, the most community I find is online. So the local, just personally where I'm located, where I am, I don't have ACE local communities anywhere near me within a close radius. So I can't answer from my side. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, also same. I wish there were like cooler things to answer about this, but like the only thing that like the ACE community is like really big on that I see and I want us to move away from is like the cake thing.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Thing, and I'm just kind of like, if I was still 17 on Tumblr, this would still be relevant, but I'm literally not. So can we move away from something else, please? Like, can we like grow up a little bit? And no, it's just like, you know, forever attached to the ACE community. And I'm just kind of like, come on, we're so much cooler than this. We're so much cooler than this. That's fine. Cooler things to attach ourselves to. But yeah, that's all. Those are the responses that I have. I think that as our community starts to grow and become more prevalent in our societies, we'll develop more quirks attached to it and more cool things. But as of right now, yeah, I don't think we have any answers for you from our respective communities. Cool. I think let's see what other questions we have in our chat.
Well, while we look for other,
I always like to ask about queer joy. So, question: would you talk about finding queer asexual joy tied to being African or just in general? Okay.
I love this question. Because it's true that we don't really talk about queer joy, and especially African queer joy. Because every time people talk about Africa and queer people, it's talking, we hear a lot of bad things happening in Africa. Africa is homophobic, Africa is transphobic, people are being killed in Africa. Whereas, we don't really explore what it means to be a happy queer person in Africa. And I think when we evolve within this kind of repressive environment, we kind of find, small pockets of happiness in a lot of small things around us. And for me, for example, I think my activism journey has been a source of joy for me, because it really kind of, I need to have a purpose to feel happy. And it really kind of, kind of gave a guidance to all the drive, the passion that I have to, for something that's really relevant to me and to the wider society as well. So I think for me, that what has been the source of joy for me, at least, was really to be, to be able to speak to power, to kind of hold power accountable within the African society, and to care for each other, and this kind of how do you say that, to build a resilient community even in the face of hatred and violence.
Mm. Wow. I love that. I love that for you. What about you, Kelly?
I think as touching on what you said, I think the joy, it links with the community as well as an internal joy, an internal pride, and internal confidence, and that also grows in the confidence of the community and the joy and the pride. Yeah, that comes. Yeah, yeah.
Mm.
I mean,
Yeah.
I'm very happy as a as a queer, like I identified as demisexual, but like queer demi ace as well, falling under the umbrella. I'm very joyous and happy within my own, and a lot of the people that I engage with, mostly online, unfortunately, but still that I engage with as well, also very joyous and proud and happy within their own identities. Yes, we've all been through a lot in terms of the own difficulties that we face inside of ourselves and every day. But I also think it's the joy also comes from building the resiliencies within yourself and the confidence and the security of your identity within yourself, so that you feel safe and secure, so that when phobia or when you face these other things from the outside, that doesn't hurt your joy.
Mm-hmm.
You can see it, it can come to you, but it can bounce off because you're strong enough within yourself, strong enough within your community,
Mm-hmm.
that you're like, you can throw that phobic stuff at me. That's okay. I'll present education and awareness to you, so hopefully, we can work towards fixing phobias in different ways, but also at the same time not letting that ruin your joy, and you just carry on going forward, being proud of who you are, because you don't. Yeah.
I definitely agree with both of you. I mean, I already shared the story of my friend like sharing that they were coming up to their parents, and that was a really big sense of joy for me because, like I mentioned earlier, like you really don't realize how much of an impact you have until you just show up as yourself. And in you showing up as yourself, you realize that there are different people in your communities that really needed that, so they can actually become more comfortable expressing themselves and coming into their own truth as well. And like within Nigeria, like I explored so many different like experiences with like queerness, and just seeing that even though like yeah, there's obviously harm within the queer community in Nigeria, there's also so much joy within the queer community in Nigeria. Like I realized that there's like a ballroom scene in Nigeria that's so well hidden and so well protected and so well celebrated. And I think that's so cool because that means to me, like, despite the fact that yes, this is something that people are afraid of in this country. It's also something that people are really proud to be expressing and be a part of, and just like find community within. And just knowing that that exists, and knowing that within the queer community and within the asexual community in general, there's so many people who just love the fact that their experiences and stories are being shared and being validated by like people like us, being validated by articles, being validated by stories like BoJack Horseman and Heartstoppers. Like it's just really cool to see that a lot of us are being able to like tap into these different things and just find support and joy within each other, and just care about the fact that we're all going through similar things and support one another through it.
I like that because there is a lot of joy in finding yourself and being authentic and going. I like that question. Bad
Yeah,
sides
me
of business
too.
is a lot of, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, okay. Are there any ways ACE communities can be supported in any other way? For example, online resources or workshops. Is there a program for ACE in Africa or that United ACE community? When you say United ACE community, do you mean like the US? If so, yes. But I can't answer for the ACEs in Africa. So y'all can take it away from there.
I know that there are a lot of resources and workshops and conferences happening around Africa, but which are not specific to the asexual community, but which are really focused on the whole spectrum of LGBTQIA plus identities. But I think that ace communities could also benefit from being in some of these spaces. But I don't think I've heard of any ACE specific space within the continent.
The only things that I can really speak to is, like, for instance, some Facebook groups, for instance, but even there, it's not that many people, or it's not very active. Yeah, I do think there's definitely opportunities. There's definitely progress to be made in terms of online communities for. Because if I look at other places, whether it's the UK or the US or Australia, where you also see a lot of representation and community building, whether it's online or offline, I do think there's definitely opportunities for us building those resources for our content.
That would be at least something that I would be very much interested in really exploring with other asexual organizations within the African continent is really how do we, because I know, for example, we have a lot of resources and spaces for learning for the wider LGBTQI communities, but maybe to kind of, create these spaces would be something I would be very much interested in.
I think you touched on something important earlier as well, was it's not us not only trying to build from the ground up as an ACE sub community, but as you were speaking earlier about the other organizations that are already existing, already established, and they're doing work in other sub levels of our broader community, and working with them so that we don't have to do some of the groundwork that is very difficult to lift off the ground, but to reach out, as you've said so far. So I'm basically just, repeating what you, reaching out to them and say, include us in this so that we can also work together and broaden. So I think us trying to build resources from nothing is, that's going to be very difficult. I think you spoke about some really.
Yeah, I think both of you already touched on it, but building from the ground up is always difficult. And doing so without having that community support is going to be even more difficult because you run into the risk of burnout and you run into the risk of just not having the support you really need to continue going on. So leading into other people and communities is always going to be helpful for us to actually foster that community and strengthen it across countries, especially the African countries, so that we can actually consistently see the representation that we need. As we are wrapping up, where can folks find you? Where can folks find each other?
So you can find me on, most of the social media spaces on LinkedIn. So I think I could just add, I don't know how to share the comments there.
Put it in the chat.
So, and I'm going to add my Twitter handle.
Oh, put it in the comments if you can. I'm going to add this here.
No, I can't add on the comments.
And you said it's Twitter? Is it Twitter, Instagram, and?
Twitter. It's Twitter.
And then do you have an Instagram?
Our mod might be able to.
I'm doing it now.
Okay.
Angie, do you only Twitter?
No, I do have Instagram, so I'm writing the handle.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then, Callie, do you have your socials that folks can find you on?
In a sense, no, because I'm not active as a speaker on, you know what I mean? Like I don't have a broadcast thing that I think both of you do. I don't have that. So I'm just thinking in terms of, because although I don't have it now doesn't mean that I don't want to do it going forward. I do want to do more of it going forward. So then it involves creating a council. So I don't have it as is now, but I would definitely need to or want to start building things going forward.
That's valid. I appreciate your transparency there. And
Yeah, I'm
whenever
novice. You guys are more in the space than me.
whenever you get the ball rolling on it, I'm sure IAD will share it. So no pressure on doing it anytime soon. For me, you can find me on LinkedIn. Yeah, if you really want to find me on LinkedIn, you can find me on LinkedIn. But my socials are Ace and Grace _ hold on, let me get it. Ace and Grace will be my IG handle and my TikTok handle that I barely use, but I have it, so you can go on there if anything. And then, yeah, that's pretty much it from us. So
I'm on LinkedIn, but I mean, my LinkedIn doesn't necessarily relate to. So I can give my LinkedIn, but it doesn't necessarily relate to. Do both of your LinkedIns fully relate to, or your occupation also?
Mine relates mostly to my occupation, but like not to my sexuality work. So that's why I'm like LinkedIn, not really, but also But in the meantime, you all who are on this live, thank you so much for being a part of it. Thank you so much for being a part of that African Aces Live. Thank you so much to our panelists for sharing your insights, sharing your stories, sharing your voices. We appreciate it so much. Thank you, Kuhu and Mick, for modding and adding questions for our audience. Right now, we're going to have everyone go back to the Ace Never Sleep live stream, which is the 24-hour-ish live stream that's going to be going on. It's a charity event. They're going to be raising funds for other ACE activists and ACE orgs around the world. So you can go on there and hop on and meet other ACEs and meet other of the hosts there. And then if you want, there's also going to be different lives happening throughout the day. There's going to be a Euro ACE live that's happening. There's also going to be the presentation I'm going to be giving at around 3 p.m. Central Time around asexuality and the intersections of the Black identity. And there's also going to be a Spanish ACEs live. And again, throughout that, there's going to be the Aces Never Sleep live stream that you can all join anytime you want. So thank you all so much for being a part of this and have a great day.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.